Multiculturalism. The implication that Tokyo would be a better, safer and more harmonious place to live if 100,000 African migrants moved in overnight. Yeah, obviously that wouldn't be the case, and most Japanese people don't go to bed at night wishing for more African, Arabic or European migrants, because the Japanese people are happy as they are. Fair point, you might say. Sadly, using this kind of rhetoric in today's woke dystopia will quickly see you cancelled. So let's try to use an analogy as to how detrimental this would be. And we'll use the analogy of the Celtic village. The year is 500 BC. Here you have a happy, safe and prosperous community of Celts living in a small village. They're the same ethnicity, they speak the same language, they are a unified people. One day, out of the blue, a Somali vagrant shows up. "Help me," he says, "I'm lost and hungry." The good people of the tribe debate amongst themselves and decide to welcome the vagrant into their community. They feed, clothe and house him, he learns their ways, and in time they come to regard him as family. All is well and the village continues to prosper. Day 2. Another vagrant shows up asking for help. The Celts are taken aback. Another vagrant? Well, we better help this one too. So, like the first vagrant, they provide food and shelter. Now vagrant 1 has a friend he can relate to. One villager voices his concern. "We should be careful," he says. "We don't know who these people are." The rest of the tribe are quick to condemn him. "That's not the way of our people," they say. "We are a tolerant and loving tribe. We are decent people." The concerned villager learns his place and quickly amends his short-sighted ways. Day 3. Another vagrant shows up. The villager once again taken aback, but since they're a large enough village, they can afford to take him in. The village now has 3 vagrants living amongst them, but it's okay because the tribe reminds themselves that they are decent people with decent values. Day 4, Day 5, Day 6. The days pass, and each new day brings another vagrant. After 2 weeks, the village now has a small Somali community living amongst them. Suddenly, the first vagrant no longer feels he needs to bow so much to the host culture, not when he has his own culture to fall back on. The Celts now find that the Somalis no longer integrate, but instead have formed their own enclave on the north side of the village. Instead of learning the host language, the vagrants find that there's now enough of them that adopting the values and ways of the hosts is no longer necessary. The village calls a meeting to discuss the newfound population. Naturally, they begin to express concern. The Celts think of themselves as good people and abhor the idea of turning away those in need. But it's now at a point where if they extend that charity too much, they'll start to become minorities in their own village. The following day, another vagrant shows up. The village is now in a 50-50 split. Half the population are original tribesmen, the other Somali. We now have 2 communities living side by side, each having their own values, each worshipping their own god, each working for the good of their respective people. Naturally, disagreements arise. Fights begin to break out. There's a feeling of unease. Both groups begin locking their doors after dark. Instead of each member working for the good of the community, they begin acting on survival instinct. Forget about sowing crops and tending the herd, let's just take what we can. Open-heartedness without foresight has backfired on the Celts. The Somalis begin to outnumber them to the point that those who built the village, who toiled and bled over the winters, now find it's fallen to the hands of outsiders. The Celts decide they've had enough. They pack their bags, move to another location and begin building a new village, this time for themselves. All is well for many years hence, and then one day, out of the blue, a Mexican vagrant shows up. "Help me," he says, "I'm lost and hungry." So, what can we learn from this analogy? Well, 2021 saw more than 28,000 channel crossings occur in the UK, with over 1,000 occurring in the first 3 weeks of January alone. Oddly enough, knife crime, gun crime, gang violence, sexual grooming, acid attacks, terror attacks and beheadings on the streets of Europe are now part and parcel of our multicultural life. Despite this, the media continues to drill into our heads that diversity is strength, that homogenous societies such as Japan are somehow worse off for not embracing diversity as we in the West. and that flooding your homeland with people who don't share your values or speak your language and whom you didn't vote to be here can only be a blessing for you and your loved ones, despite the aforementioned violence it brings. Liberals are quick to condemn that as hatred, but it's more about truth-seeking. The idea that any people or community benefit by being replaced in their own homeland is one of the greatest cons of the last century. But if current trends continue, this is exactly where Europe will find itself by 2060. Any culture that chooses to become multicultural takes a great risk. On paper, we all sit down for a hippie free-for-all, citing empty platitudes like we all bleed the same colour, as if that's enough to resolve our cultural differences. In reality, you have a media that works overtime to brush migrant crimes against whites under the carpet. I've covered that in another video. I'm sure you've all heard of George Floyd, but how many have heard of Cannon Hinnant, the 5-year-old child murdered in cold blood by drug-using felon Darius Sessoms? And there's many others. True diversity is good, which is a free exchange of ideas and upholding the foundational principles of Western academia. What we have is fake diversity, a diversity that's simply about flooding Europe with non-Europeans and then censoring any criticism of that. And therein lies the hypocrisy. If certain opinions aren't permitted on the basis that they're the wrong opinion, then the very concept of diversity is flawed. If you like my work and want to support me, please pick up a copy of my book, The Nofap Success System, which addresses the crisis of masculinity facing the West and what to do about it. Links below the video, and thanks for watching.